Imagine waking up to the peaceful sounds of your home, only to have everything you love ripped away in an instant. Can you forgive the unforgivable? Most people say forgiveness is for the weak, but what if I told you that forgiveness could set you free in ways you never imagined? Today, I'm going to share the powerful, controversial story of Anthony Ray Hinton, a man who spent almost 30 years on death row for crimes he never committed. He had every reason to hold on to anger, to seek revenge, to give up hope. But instead, he chose forgiveness. If you've ever been hurt, betrayed, or struggled to forgive someone, stay right here, because this story might just change everything you believe about pain, justice, and the incredible power of letting go. It was a quiet Sunday morning, and the sun was just starting to peek through the curtains, casting gentle rays of warmth into the kitchen. Anthony Ray Hinton sat at the small wooden table, sipping his coffee, savoring the peaceful silence. The scent of freshly baked biscuits wafted through the air, a comforting reminder of his mother's love. Anthony, a tall man with gentle brown eyes, a warm smile, short black hair, and a kind face shaped by kindness, glanced lovingly across the table at his mother, Sylvia Hinton, whose gentle laughter brightened even the darkest days. Just as Anthony reached for another biscuit, a sudden, heavy pounding at the front door sliced through the serene morning like thunder. Startled, Anthony and his mother exchanged quick, worried glances. Anthony rose cautiously, his usually calm expression replaced by confusion. Before he could even reach the door, it burst open. Several police officers stormed into the small, welcoming kitchen, their presence overpowering. The sound of boots thudding against the polished wooden floor shattered the morning's tranquility. "Anthony Ray Hinton," one officer demanded, his voice stern and sharp, echoing off the walls. Anthony's eyes widened in disbelief, heart hammering in his chest. He nodded hesitantly. "Yes, sir, I'm Anthony. What's going on?" Without responding, an officer grabbed Anthony's wrists roughly, snapping handcuffs around them. Anthony's eyes widened in shock and fear. Wait. What's happening? What's going on?" Anthony's voice trembled, searching the officers' stone-cold faces for answers. "Anthony Ray Hinton, you're under arrest," one officer announced, his voice cold, mechanical. "Charged with robbery and murder." His mother cried out, reaching towards her son desperately. "No, you've got it wrong. My son would never do anything like that. He's innocent." "Mama, it'll be okay," Anthony tried to reassure her, though his heart raced with panic. He locked eyes with his mother as he was pulled toward the door, desperately wanting to comfort her, yet feeling helpless. Neighbors gathered in stunned silence as Anthony was led outside, their familiar faces filled with disbelief and concern. Rosewood Heights, a neighborhood always buzzing with kindness and friendly greetings, now watched quietly as Anthony was forced into a police car, his face pressed against the cool window, watching helplessly as his life changed in an instant. As the vehicle sped away, leaving behind the warmth of his home and the safety of everything he knew, Anthony took one last look at his mother's tearful face, framed by the doorway. He didn't know it yet, but this painful moment was the beginning of an extraordinary journey. A journey that would teach him the greatest lessons about faith, resilience, and the transformative power of forgiveness. Sunlight streamed softly through the narrow window of the interrogation room, but Anthony could hardly feel its warmth. The chair beneath him was cold, unyielding metal pressing harshly against his back. He shifted nervously, heart racing, sweat dampening his forehead. Just moments ago, his only concern had been finishing breakfast. Now, confusion filled every part of him. Across the table sat Detective Samuel Richards, a stern-looking man with sharp, penetrating blue eyes, his face angular and expressionless. Richards, his younger partner, paced impatiently near the doorway, casting suspicious glances at Anthony every few seconds. "Anthony Ray Hinton," began Officer Richards in a firm, accusing tone. "Where were you on the night of February 25th? Anthony swallowed hard, his gentle brown eyes wide with disbelief and confusion. His usually composed face twisted anxiously. "February 25th, he repeated slowly, shaking his head. "Sir, that was weeks ago. I don't remember exactly. Probably home with my mom or working late." "Why?" Officer Richards leaned forward, narrowing his eyes sharply. "We have witnesses placing you at 2 robberies, 2 shootings, 2 innocent lives lost." Anthony felt as though the air had been ripped from his chest. He struggled to speak, his voice cracking slightly. No, you've got it wrong. I've never harmed anyone. I've never robbed anyone." Officer Richards slammed his hand on the metal table, startling Anthony. "We have your description, Anthony. Your car. Even a witness who swears it's you." Anthony swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead, his gentle face tense with desperation. "Please, just listen. Call my mama. Ask my friend Lester. He knows me better than anyone. I would never do anything like this." Richards leaned closer, his voice quieter but filled with suspicion. "People say a lot of things when they're desperate, Anthony." Richards straightened up abruptly, signaling his partner. "Book him," he ordered, not even sparing Anthony another glance. "No, please," Anthony begged, standing quickly, only to be restrained immediately by Officer Richards' partner. Panic surged through him as cold metal cuffs tightened again around his wrists, painfully familiar now. Outside the interrogation room, Anthony caught a glimpse of officers whispering to one another, stealing judgmental glances at him. He felt helpless, trapped in a nightmare he couldn't awaken from. Minutes later, Anthony found himself shoved roughly into a cell, the door clanging shut behind him with an echoing finality. Alone, he sank onto the cold bench, gripping his trembling hands tightly. The walls felt like they were closing in, heavy with accusations and disbelief. Anthony's mind spun with confusion and anguish, haunted by thoughts of his mother's worried eyes and Lester's reassuring voice. The bitter taste of injustice burned in his throat as he stared blankly at the grey walls around him, praying silently. That truth would soon light his way out of the darkness. Cold air seeped through the cracked walls of Westridge Prison, chilling Anthony Ray Hinton to the bone. He sat on the thin mattress in his cell, staring blankly at the grey concrete walls, trying desperately to cling to memories of better days. Images of Rosewood Park, children laughing, friends joking, his mother's gentle smile, flickered through his mind, like fragile beams of sunlight piercing through storm clouds. His deep brown eyes, once filled with warmth, were heavy with sadness now, though a quiet determination lingered somewhere deep within. Anthony rubbed his tired face, the weariness evident in his dark, expressive eyes. He barely recognized the reflection in the tiny mirror above the sink. His usually bright eyes were now dull with despair. From the bed across the cramped cell came a deep, rough voice. "First time inside?" Anthony turned, meeting the gaze of Marcus Evans. Marcus was a middle-aged man whose face, rugged and scarred by years behind bars, seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken stories. His eyes were sharp yet weary, his head shaved, with a thick graying beard framing his hardened features. "Yeah," Anthony replied quietly, forcing himself to sound calm, though his insides twisted with anxiety. "But I shouldn't be here." Marcus chuckled softly, bitterly. "That's what everyone says their first night. Thing is, most people don't believe them." Anthony swallowed hard, his voice shaking slightly. "I'm innocent, Marcus. They say I took 2 lives, but I swear on everything I love I had nothing to do with it." Marcus studied Anthony silently for a moment, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. He had seen plenty of liars, but there was something different about Anthony's earnestness, something genuine. Finally, Marcus nodded slowly, his expression softening a little. "Look, innocent or not, Marcus began, his voice quieter, kinder. "You've got to hold on to something strong in here. Faith, memories, anything that keeps you sane." Anthony sighed deeply, sinking his head into his hands. "How do you find hope in a place like this?" Marcus stood slowly, moving towards the bars and staring out into the empty hallway, shadows dancing beneath the flickering fluorescent lights. "You don't find hope. You choose it, every single day. Hope is what keeps you alive. It's your only weapon against the darkness that wants to swallow you up." Silence settled between them, heavy and profound. Anthony pondered Marcus's words, each syllable sinking deep into his soul. The echo of footsteps interrupted their conversation, breaking the fragile stillness. An officer paused briefly at the cell, his indifferent eyes glancing coldly inside. "Lights out!" the guard barked sharply. Darkness enveloped the cell once again, leaving Anthony alone with his thoughts. Lying down, he closed his eyes, imagining his mother's gentle hand on his shoulder and Lester's reassuring voice echoing softly, "We'll get through this, Ray." And, somehow, despite the chilling darkness around him, Anthony decided at that moment he would choose hope, no matter how faint its light might be. Sunlight filtered softly through the dusty window of the prison library, casting warm patches on worn tables and shelves filled with old, faded books. Anthony Ray Hinton sat hunched over a thick, heavy law book, fingers tracing lines of dense text, eyes tired but focused. His gentle face was more gaunt now, cheeks hollowed by stress and sleepless nights, yet determination shone fiercely in his deep brown eyes. Suddenly, the creak of the library door opening broke his concentration. Anthony glanced up to see Lester Owens stepping through, instantly filling the bleak room with his familiar presence. Lester was a sturdy man with broad shoulders, a kind, round face, dark curly hair sprinkled lightly with grey, and comforting eyes that always seemed to say, "I'm here for you." Anthony felt his heart lighten as Lester approached, pulling out the chair across from him and sitting heavily. The old wooden seat groaned in protest. "How you holding up, Ray?" Lester asked gently, his voice warm and concerned. Anthony sighed deeply, his shoulders sinking. "Every day feels like climbing a mountain, Les. But I can't stop fighting. I have to keep going." Lester nodded thoughtfully, his expression serious yet hopeful. "You know I'm with you. Everyone back home misses you. Your mama talks about you every day, says prayers every night." Anthony's throat tightened, eyes glistening with emotion. "How is she? Tell me she's okay." "She's hanging in there," Lester reassured softly. "Strong as ever, though she misses her baby boy. But she believes in you, Ray. We all do." Anthony closed his eyes briefly, letting Lester's words sink in, then reopened them with renewed determination. "I have to prove my innocence, Lester. This isn't just for me. It's for Mama, for you, for everyone who knows the truth." Lester reached across the worn table, gripping Anthony's hand firmly, his voice unwavering. "We'll get there, one step at a time." The two men sat quietly for a moment, the comforting silence speaking louder than words. Suddenly, Anthony looked down at the book again, tapping it gently with his fingertips. "You know, Les," Anthony said softly, his voice almost a whisper, "I didn't even understand half the words in these books when I started. Now I dream about legal terms at night." Lester chuckled softly, the deep rumble of his laughter filling the small room with warmth. "Who knew you'd become a scholar?" Anthony smiled faintly, a genuine laugh bubbling up, surprising even himself. "Guess you can learn anything when your freedom depends on it." As the afternoon sun continued its slow journey, painting golden hues across the library floor, Anthony knew he still had many battles ahead. But at this moment, sitting across from his closest friend, surrounded by faded pages filled with hope and possibility, Anthony felt less alone. Together, they would face whatever darkness lay ahead. It was a chilly Wednesday evening, the kind of day where grey clouds hung low, threatening rain at any moment. Anthony walked slowly toward the prison chapel, his footsteps echoing softly against the cold concrete floors. The chapel was small and humble, nestled in a quiet corner of the prison, a place seemingly untouched by the harshness that surrounded it. As Anthony entered, he felt an immediate warmth, a peaceful stillness unlike anywhere else in Westridge Prison. Rows of wooden benches lined the room, polished by years of hopeful souls who sought comfort here. At the front stood Pastor Eleanor Whitman, a kind woman in her late 60s, her silver curls catching the soft glow of flickering candles. Her eyes, deep brown and compassionate, held stories of endless patience and unwavering kindness. "Anthony," Pastor Eleanor greeted him softly, her voice warm and gentle, instantly melting away some of the heaviness he carried. "I'm glad you came tonight." Anthony offered a small, weary smile as he settled into a seat near the front. His deep brown eyes held pain, worry, and countless unspoken questions. He clutched a worn Bible tightly in his hands, its cover softened by years of his mother's gentle touch. "Pastor," Anthony began hesitantly, looking down at his shaking hands, "how do you forgive people who've done you wrong? How do you find peace in the middle of all this injustice?" Pastor Eleanor approached gently, her calm presence filling the space between them. Sitting beside him, she took a deep breath, carefully choosing her words. "Anthony, forgiveness isn't about saying what someone did to you is okay. It's about freeing your own heart from anger and bitterness." Anthony stared at her thoughtfully, his eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight. "It's just hard, Pastor. They've stolen so much from me. My life, my freedom, time with my mama." His voice broke, thick with emotion. "I know it's hard," Pastor Eleanor said softly, placing a comforting hand on his broad shoulder. "Forgiveness doesn't mean you forget your pain, Anthony. It means you refuse to be defined by it." Anthony closed his eyes, his thoughts swirling like a storm within him. Pastor Eleanor's words echoed in his mind, slowly beginning to soothe his weary soul. The chapel's quiet embrace wrapped around him like his mother's comforting hug after a bad dream. "I want to forgive," Anthony whispered, opening his eyes again, tears glistening softly on his face. "But sometimes it feels impossible." "It's never easy," Pastor Eleanor nodded gently, "but that's exactly why forgiveness is so powerful. It gives you back your freedom, freedom that no walls, no bars, no chains can ever take from you." Silence settled between them again, gentle and healing. Anthony glanced down at the Bible he held so tightly, imagining his mother's reassuring voice reading passages of faith and hope. He felt her presence strongly, whispering to his heart, guiding him toward peace. Taking a deep breath, Anthony met Pastor Eleanor's steady gaze. A quiet strength filled his voice as he spoke. "I won't let bitterness control my life, Pastor. I'm ready to start this journey no matter how long it takes." Pastor Eleanor smiled softly, her kind eyes filled with encouragement. "And I'll be right here beside you, Anthony, every step of the way." It was a quiet Thursday afternoon, and a gentle rain tapped rhythmically against the barred windows of the visitation room, creating tiny rivers of water that traced paths down the glass. Anthony Ray Hinton sat silently at the table, his fingers nervously tracing invisible circles on the worn wooden surface. His face, now marked by years behind bars, bore deep lines that whispered stories of hardship and resilience. Yet, beneath those weary eyes, still glowed a quiet, stubborn flame of hope. The door across the room creaked open, and Anthony lifted his head slowly. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the man walking toward him, a figure he didn't recognize. Brian Stevenson was younger than Anthony had imagined a lawyer could be, but there was something profoundly calming about him. Brian's presence radiated kindness and quiet strength, his expressive eyes instantly meeting Anthony's gaze, reassuring him before he even spoke a word. "Anthony," Brian asked softly, a gentle smile, lighting his serious face as he reached out to shake Anthony's hand firmly. "I'm Brian Stevenson. I've come here to help you." Anthony hesitated, feeling cautious but also strangely comforted. "Help me," he repeated, his voice low and uncertain, as though the words were foreign to him now. "I've heard that before, Brian." "I know," Brian said gently, taking a seat across from Anthony. His voice was steady, his eyes full of unwavering sincerity. "But I've looked at your case. Every single detail. I see you, Anthony. I see your innocence, and I'm here to fight for you." Anthony's eyes widened slightly, his lips trembling with emotion. He desperately fought to keep contained. He hadn't heard anyone speak with such conviction about his innocence in decades. He drew a deep breath, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've dreamed of hearing those words, Mr. Stevenson, for so long. Sometimes it felt like nobody was listening." Brian leaned forward earnestly, resting his arms on the table, his voice low but powerful. "I believe you, Anthony, and I won't stop until you're free. But I need you to believe too. Hold on, just a little longer." Anthony nodded slowly, blinking back tears. "I've been holding on for almost 30 years, Mr. Stevenson. I've seen men lose hope. I've seen hope break them. Why should I believe things will change now?" Brian leaned closer, his voice calm yet unwavering. "Because now, you're not alone. Now, you have someone who will walk this journey with you, and together, we'll make sure the world hears your truth." Anthony took a deep, shaky breath, feeling something deep within him ignite once more. "All right," he whispered softly, voice strengthened by newfound resolve. "All right, I'm with you." Outside, the rain began to slow, the clouds gradually parting as gentle beams of sunlight broke through the lingering gloom. Anthony felt it then, the smallest, most fragile spark of possibility. That perhaps after so long, his life was finally freedom. The morning was bright and clear, like nature itself had chosen this exact moment to celebrate. A cool breeze whispered softly through the blooming trees outside Westridge Prison, carrying with it the fresh scent of springtime, something Anthony Ray Hinton hadn't experienced freely in nearly 3 decades. Anthony stood near the large iron gate, his heart racing with anticipation, anxiety, and disbelief. He wore simple clothes that felt strangely new yet comforting against his skin, replacing the worn prison jumpsuit he had grown to hate. He took deep breaths, savoring the fresh air he'd dreamed about for so long, tasting freedom for the first time in almost 30 years. Nearby, Lester stood waiting, a broad, warm smile lighting up his familiar face. He hadn't changed much. His dark eyes still radiated warmth, his hair slightly grayed now, but his unwavering presence just as strong as ever. "Ray!" Lester called out, his voice filled with joy and relief, arms wide open to welcome his friend back into the world. Anthony stepped forward slowly, eyes brimming with tears, trembling hands reaching out toward his friend. As their embrace tightened, a lifetime of pain, loss, and loneliness poured out through Anthony's tears, shoulders shaking gently. "I missed you, brother," Anthony whispered, his voice rough and emotional. "I can't believe this day finally came." Lester squeezed him tighter, his voice steady and reassuring. "You made it through, Ray. You're finally free, man." Anthony pulled back slightly, wiping tears from his weathered face, a genuine smile brightening his tired features. "I don't even know how to feel right now," he admitted softly, his voice tinged with wonder and lingering disbelief. Lester placed a steady hand on Anthony's shoulder, his own eyes filled with joyful tears. "You're allowed to feel it all, brother. Every single emotion. Just feel it. You earned this day." Anthony looked around, noticing familiar faces standing just beyond the prison gates, old neighbors from Rosewood Heights, now grayed but smiling brightly, their cheers and applause mingling with birdsong, filling the morning air with warmth and love. He saw familiar faces, older now but still recognizable, nodding and smiling at him as if saying, "We believed in you." Slowly, Anthony raised his face toward the sky, sunlight washing gently over him, warmth spreading slowly through every inch of his being. The harsh memories of steel bars, endless isolation, and sleepless nights began to loosen their grip. He felt lighter, stronger, like the world had finally decided to welcome him back home. "It's a beautiful day," Anthony whispered softly, almost to himself, his voice filled with quiet awe. "It is," Lester agreed gently, smiling warmly, "and it's just the first of many more to come." Hand in hand, guided by friendship and hope, Anthony and Lester walked slowly down the street away from Westridge Prison. Behind them, the stark building gradually shrank into the distance, while ahead lay the open road, bathed in sunlight, inviting Anthony to reclaim the life he'd long been denied. Golden leaves gently swirled in the crisp autumn breeze, scattering across the quiet paths of Rosewood Heights Cemetery. Anthony Ray Hinton stood silently, shoulders squared, eyes soft and reflective, gazing down at the familiar gravestone nestled beneath the sturdy branches of the old oak tree. His mother's resting place was simple yet lovingly maintained, her name etched clearly in the weathered stone, Sylvia Hinton. He knelt slowly, knees pressing against the cool grass, fingers tracing her name as memories flooded his heart. The crisp air smelled faintly of earth and fallen leaves, comforting yet poignant, reminding him of the countless autumn days spent laughing and talking with his mother. "Hey, Mama," Anthony whispered softly, his voice trembling slightly, rich with emotion. "I'm finally home." As silence surrounded him, broken only by rustling leaves and distant birdsong, Anthony felt the weight of the years he'd lost pressing down on his chest. He imagined his mother's gentle face, the softness in her eyes, the strength in her smile, and he wondered if she could see him now, free but carrying the weight of everything he'd endured. Footsteps crunched softly behind him, breaking the quiet reverence. Anthony turned slightly, seeing Lester standing respectfully a few feet away, hands in his coat pockets, watching quietly. "Do you think she knows, Lester?" Anthony asked, eyes still fixed lovingly on the simple gravestone. "Do you think she knows I made it?" Lester stepped closer, placing a supportive hand on Anthony's shoulder. "She knows, Ray. She always knew you'd make it home. She never doubted." Anthony's eyes filled with tears, the gentle wind brushing softly against his face, as if his mother were comforting him one last time. He looked up at the old oak tree overhead, its branches spreading protectively above, as strong and reassuring as his mother had always been. "I wanted to be here," Anthony spoke softly, his voice thick with emotion. "And to hold her hand again, tell her how much she meant to me, how much I loved her. But they took that away from me, Lester. How do I forgive that?" Lester stepped closer, resting a comforting hand on Anthony's shoulder, his voice gentle yet firm. "She wouldn't want you carrying that burden, Ray. She'd want you free, not just from prison, but from anger, too." Anthony took a deep breath, feeling the truth in Lester's words resonate deeply within him. A tear slipped down his cheek, falling softly onto the earth beneath him. "I promised her I'd find a way to forgive," Anthony said quietly, his voice gaining strength. "She always believed it was possible." Lester knelt beside him, placing a reassuring hand on the cold stone marker. She raised you strong, Ray. You have her heart, her courage, and if anyone can do it, you can. Anthony looked once more at the name carved lovingly into the stone, feeling a gentle sense of peace begin to settle over him. Rising slowly to his feet, he reached out, gripping Lester's shoulder, drawing strength from his best friend's unwavering support. Together, they turned away from the grave, walking slowly down the winding cemetery path. The leaves danced softly around them, the whispers of the past gently guiding Anthony toward a future he was now ready to face, free from the chains of resentment and finally ready to embrace forgiveness. The gentle hum of quiet conversations filled the auditorium at Lincoln High School as students shuffled restlessly in their seats, waiting for something, or someone, to capture their attention. The walls of the large, airy hall were decorated with colorful banners proclaiming messages like hope, change, and forgiveness. The bright lights overhead illuminated a stage set with a simple microphone and a small wooden podium. Backstage, Anthony Ray Hinton took a deep breath, steadying himself. His tall frame, now filled out again with health and strength, stood straight and strong. He gently adjusted the cuffs of his neatly pressed white shirt, looking down briefly at his hands that had held so many prison bars, books of law, and letters filled with desperate hope. "Ready?" asked Lester quietly, standing beside him, his familiar, reassuring voice breaking Anthony's thoughtful silence. Anthony nodded slowly, a gentle smile crossing his face. "As ready as I'll ever be." Stepping onto the stage, Anthony felt a brief rush of nerves, his heart quickening. But as he walked to the podium, he felt a surprising calm settle over him. Looking out into the sea of youthful faces, he saw their curiosity, their questions, and even a little skepticism. Yet he knew these young minds and hearts were exactly why he was there. "Good morning, everyone." Anthony's rich, warm voice filled the hall, immediately silencing the murmurs and capturing every eye. "My name is Anthony Ray Hinton, and I spent almost 3 decades of my life locked behind bars for crimes I never committed." Gasps rippled gently through the audience, eyes widening in shock and sympathy. Anthony paused a moment, his deep brown eyes meeting theirs warmly yet seriously. "I lost years of my life," Anthony continued softly, his voice steady yet deeply emotional. "But during those dark times, I discovered something powerful, something life-changing: forgiveness." He stepped out from behind the podium, moving closer to the edge of the stage, speaking as though he was addressing each person individually. "Forgiveness isn't just about the person who hurt you. It's about setting yourself free. I carried anger and bitterness inside me for years, but I realized it only held me back. It imprisoned me even more deeply." A young student in the 3rd row raised her hand hesitantly, her voice gentle yet curious. "But how could you forgive them? How could you move past something like that?" Anthony looked at her with compassion, nodding thoughtfully. "It wasn't easy, but I realized I had a choice. Let the pain control me, or take control of my own heart. I chose freedom, real freedom, and the moment I chose forgiveness, I was finally truly free." The room fell silent, students leaning forward, hanging on every word. Anthony's gaze swept over them, his voice strong yet kind, filled with sincerity. "Each of you will face hard moments in your lives, times when forgiving feels impossible. But remember, forgiveness is your greatest strength, your greatest power. No one can take that from you." As Anthony finished speaking, applause thundered through the auditorium, heartfelt and sincere, echoing off the walls. Lester stood quietly backstage, eyes filled with pride, knowing this was exactly the voice the world needed to hear, a voice that had overcome pain, injustice, and bitterness to speak boldly of hope, love, and the extraordinary power of forgiveness. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. Anthony's story teaches us something powerful. Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's freedom. But now, it's your turn. Who do you need to forgive today? What pain or bitterness are you holding on to that's keeping you from truly being free? Are you ready to choose forgiveness and finally let go of the hurt that's holding you back? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story. And if this video touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another life-changing story. Remember, forgiveness can change everything. I'll see you in the next video.